The train screeched to a halt under the blazing afternoon sun, the long whistle echoing across the wide Kansas plains like a cry from some restless ghost. Dust swirled in the wind as the passengers stepped down, clutching their bags, their hats, their hopes. Clara Whitmore stood among them, small and quiet, her gloved hands clutching a faded carpet bag that contained everything she owned. She blinked against the brightness, her heart thudding painfully in her chest as she looked out across the open land. This was it, the end of her long journey, the beginning of a new life. At least that was what she had prayed for every night on the rattling train. She was 42 years old, and the world had not been kind. Her face carried the faint lines of years spent working as a seamstress in a city that forgot her name the moment she left. Her hair, once chestnut, was streaked with gray, tucked neatly beneath a worn blue bonnet. Her dress, mended and ironed until the fabric was nearly threadbare, fluttered in the dusty wind. She had answered the advertisement with trembling hands months ago. Rancher in Wyoming seeks Christian woman for companionship and marriage. Hard worker preferred. Age not a concern. She'd written back in careful cursive, telling the truth about herself. She wasn't young or rich, but she could cook, sew, and tend to a home. She had been honest. She thought that would be enough. A man stood apart from the small crowd, tall and sun-darkened, his broad hat shadowing a rugged face. When he stepped closer, Clara's breath caught. He had the kind of presence that made a person straighten unconsciously, the kind of silence that spoke louder than most words. "Mrs. Whitmore?" he asked, his voice deep, roughened by years of wind and work. She smiled shyly. "Yes, you must be Mr. Thomas Burroughs." He nodded, but there was hesitation in his eyes. They darted over her face, her hands, the fine wrinkles around her mouth, and lingered for a moment too long. He had seen her picture, a faded photograph taken years ago, and though she hadn't lied, she knew that pictures had their kindness. His expression flickered, something like disappointment hidden behind polite restraint. "You made good time," he said finally, shifting his hat. "Didn't expect the train in for another hour." "I was afraid to miss it," she said, smiling, trying to sound cheerful. "It was a long journey, but the thought of finally meeting you kept me strong." He didn't smile. "Not really." He nodded once more, glancing toward the buggy behind him where a severe-looking older woman sat, her mouth pressed thin. "That's my ma," he muttered. "She wanted to come along." The woman climbed down, her black dress immaculate, her gray eyes sharp as blades. "So," she said, looking Clara over from bonnet to boots, "you're the bride the agency sent?" Clara tried to curtsy slightly, holding her bag close. "Yes, ma'am." "Clara Whitmore, it's an honor to meet you both." The older woman sniffed, folding her hands. "You're older than I expected." "The agency said he was to get someone suitable." A tremor ran through Clara's heart. "The letter said age wasn't—" "Letters lie," the woman cut in coldly. "And photographs do too." She turned to her son, lips tightening. "Thomas, you can't be serious about this." "Look at her. She's nearly your age." Clara stood frozen, her face pale, her pulse drumming in her ears. Mr. Burroughs shifted uncomfortably, rubbing the back of his neck. "Now, Ma, don't you ma me." "You need a wife who can give you children, not someone past her prime." Her words fell like stones. Clara's throat tightened painfully. She'd expected hesitation, perhaps surprise, but not cruelty. "I may be older, but I'm strong," she said softly. "I can work. I can cook and mend. I can make a home." Mr. Burroughs looked at her then, and his eyes were not unkind, only uncertain. "You seem like a good woman, Mrs. Whitmore. I don't doubt that. But I guess I didn't think things through. I reckon I thought—" He stopped himself, glancing at his mother, then back at her. "I'm sorry. I just can't." The words hit harder than she expected. Not because she loved him, she'd barely met him, but because it meant the end of everything she had dared to hope for. The train ticket, the months of letters, the courage it had taken to step into the unknown, all for nothing. She tried to speak, but her voice came out brittle. "See, then I suppose I should find the next train back east." Mr. Burroughs nodded, shame flickering in his eyes. "That might be best. The agency'll fix it up, I'm sure." His mother turned away, already satisfied. "Come on, Thomas. We've wasted enough time." Clara watched them go, her eyes burning, her lips trembling as she forced herself not to cry. When the buggy rolled away, the dust swallowed their shapes until there was nothing left but wind. She stood alone on the station platform, the wide emptiness of the prairie stretching out forever. Around her, laughter echoed, other brides meeting their grooms, smiles and embraces and promises. The sound cut her like glass. She found an empty bench near the edge of the platform and sat down, clutching her bag to her chest. The sky seemed enormous, mercilessly blue. A single tear slipped down her cheek before she brushed it away. She would not cry where people could see. She would not give them that satisfaction. The train station master, a kindly man with a limp, approached her hesitantly. "Ma'am, you need a place to stay till the next train." She shook her head. "No, thank you. I'll wait here. I don't have much left and I'd rather stay where I can see the tracks." He nodded with sympathy, then left her to her silence. Hours passed. The sun dipped lower, painting the plains in fire and shadow. Her body ached, but she barely noticed. She thought of all the years behind her, the youth she'd spent working for other people, watching the world move on without her. She had believed this was her chance to start again, to belong to someone, to be wanted. But even here, at the edge of the world, she was still too old, too plain, too much a reminder of time's cruelty. She pressed a hand to her chest and whispered, "You foolish woman. You should have known better." The wind carried her words away, a ghostly sigh through the grass. She looked out toward the horizon and saw a lone figure leaning against the fence, watching her. A man tall and broad-shouldered with a weathered face and kind eyes. He didn't look away when she noticed him. Instead, he took off his hat slowly, respectfully. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he walked toward her, his boots stirring the dust. When he finally stood before her, his voice was low, steady. "Ma'am, you look like you could use a hand." Clara blinked, unsure if she should answer. "No, thank you," she murmured, her voice trembling. "I'm used to standing alone." The man studied her quietly, then nodded. "Maybe. But no one should have to." She looked up at him fully then, the lines on his face, the gentleness in his eyes. And for the first time that day, the ache in her heart softened just a little. She didn't know it yet, but the man who had stopped to speak would change the course of her life forever. His name was Samuel Hargrove, and he was lonelier than anyone she had ever met. The morning sunlight rolled across the prairie like a golden tide, washing over the Hargrove ranch and painting everything in quiet warmth. The dew still clung to the grass, sparkling faintly in the dawn. Clara stood on the porch in her borrowed shawl, a chipped mug of coffee in her hands, and listened to the soft rhythm of hooves in the barnyard. Samuel was already up working the horses before breakfast, the steady scrape of his boots against the dirt, a comfort she hadn't known she needed. It had been 2 days since he'd found her at the train station, 2 days since he'd said the words that had changed the direction of her life. "Then just be mine." She still wasn't sure if she'd heard him right at first. People didn't speak like that to her anymore. But when she'd looked up into his face, she'd seen no pity there, no calculation, just quiet certainty, as if he'd made peace with something long ago. She watched him now, his shoulders broad beneath a faded shirt, the morning light glinting off the edge of his hat. There was a grace to his strength, a patience to every movement. When he noticed her standing there, he gave a small nod before walking toward the porch. "Morning, Clara," he said softly. His voice was like gravel and honey, rough but kind. She smiled faintly. "Good morning, Samuel. I made coffee. It's strong, I'm afraid." He took the cup from her, brushing her fingers lightly, and the touch sent a warmth through her that startled her. "Strong's how I like it," he said, taking a sip. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," she said, looking down at her hands. "It's nice to feel useful." He set the cup on the railing and studied her face for a long moment. "You already are." She didn't know what to say to that. Compliments weren't things that had followed her through life. She'd been called many things, kind, plain, reliable, but rarely wanted. Now standing here in the quiet of this ranch, she began to feel something she hadn't felt in years, needed. "Your place is beautiful," she said, glancing out toward the hills. "Peaceful too?" Samuel followed her gaze, his expression softening. "Peaceful, aye. Lonely too. This land's good, but it don't talk back. Been a long time since anyone's shared coffee with me out here." Her heart squeezed. "You were married," she said gently. "The agency mentioned you were widowed." He nodded, his eyes lowering. 8 years. Martha passed in her sleep. Fever took her fast. Since then, it's just been me and the cattle. Guess I stopped expecting much more out of life. He paused, glancing at her. Then I saw you sitting alone at that station, and something in me couldn't walk away. Clara blinked back, sudden tears. "You hardly know me, Samuel." He smiled faintly. "I know what I need to. You came all this way for love, and still managed to stand tall after someone tried to break you. That's enough for me." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "You make it sound like courage. Truth is, I was too tired to cry." "That's still courage," he said simply. The wind stirred between them, carrying the scent of hay and sage. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried, circling the open sky. Clara looked out over the vast land stretching endlessly in every direction, and something in her chest loosened. For so long, she had lived in rooms with walls too close, in lives that felt too small. Here the world was wide enough for her to breathe again. They ate breakfast together, fresh bread, eggs, and black coffee. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was easy, natural, like two people who had already learned the rhythm of each other's quiet. Afterward, Samuel took her on a walk through the fields. The earth was warm beneath their boots, the smell of grass rich and alive. "I reckon it ain't fancy," he said, glancing around at the fences that leaned a little, and the barn whose paint had long since peeled. "But it's home. It's honest," she replied. "That's worth more than fancy." He smiled, the first full smile she'd seen from him. It made him look younger. "You're something else, Clara Whitmore." She felt her face flush. "Something else or something strange?" "Something real," he said. They stopped near the corral where the cattle grazed lazily. The sky stretched out above them in an ocean of blue, and for the first time in years, Clara felt the pull of belonging. Not because she had earned it, but because someone saw her as she was and still wanted her there. Days turned into a week. Clara began to move about the house as if it had always been hers, cleaning, cooking, sewing new curtains from old fabric. Samuel tried to protest at first, but she just smiled and told him she'd been idle too long. Evenings, they'd sit together on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the hills, the light fading into soft pink and gold. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't need to. One evening, as the air turned cool and the stars began to show, Samuel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Town's starting to talk," he said quietly. "They say a mail-order bride came and didn't marry her man. Say she's living out here now with a widower no one's seen smile in 8 years. Clara sipped her tea slowly. "People will always talk, Samuel. It's what keeps their days interesting." He chuckled. "Maybe. But I don't want you feeling shamed by my name." She looked at him then, her eyes steady. "Do you feel ashamed of me?" His brow furrowed. "No, ma'am." "Not a bit." "Then I don't care what anyone says," she said softly. "Let them talk. I've spent most of my life worrying about what people thought of me. I won't waste what's left of it doing the same." He turned to her, surprise in his eyes. "You're stronger than you think, Clara." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I just finally stopped being afraid." The silence between them stretched, gentle as a lullaby. Then Samuel took a slow breath, his voice low. "I meant what I said back there, when I told you to be mine." Her hands tightened around her cup. "You hardly knew me, Samuel." "I know enough," he said again, his eyes searching hers. "I know what it means to be alone. I know what it means to lose faith in second chances. And I know that since you stepped onto this land, I don't feel so hollow anymore." Her breath caught. "You make it sound easy." He smiled sadly. "Nothing worth keeping ever is." He stood then, turning toward the horizon where the last light burned red and gold. "I ain't got much, Clara. This ranch, a few head of cattle, my word. But if you'll stay, I'll give you every bit of it. Not as a worker, not as a guest, as my wife." The world seemed to go still. She rose slowly, her heart pounding. "Your wife," she repeated. He nodded once, his expression calm, but his voice trembling ever so slightly. "If you still want to be." Tears welled in her eyes, hot and unexpected. For years she had been unwanted, unseen, passed over. And now this man, quiet, steady, good, was offering her not pity, but partnership. She reached out, taking his calloused hand in hers. "I do," she whispered. The words hung between them like a prayer. Samuel smiled then, and for the first time in nearly a decade, laughter, real, deep, and warm, echoed across the Hargrove ranch. That night, the wind carried their laughter into the open sky, across the fields and hills, through the grass that shimmered silver under the moon. The lonely rancher had found his home again, not in a house or land, but in the quiet strength of a woman who had thought her story was over. And Clara, for the first time in her life, no longer felt like someone waiting to be chosen. She had been found,